Hello, Dr. Moore. So this particular lesson is going to be on the art of asking questions. And the premise, the hypothesis of this lesson is that it's easier to ask good questions if you're able to place information into context while you're learning it. And so as a student of science, one of the things that sometimes people do as they start the game is as they're problem solving, they look to the back of the book and they want to get validated that they understand something based on the answer that's in the back of the book. But you still have to be able to understand every step along the way and why that answer is correct. And so if I asked you, how do you know when you've gotten a question right if there's no answer in the back of the book? What ways would you be able to qualify that answer that you have when you knew that you couldn't get it validated by an answer in the back? And so there's 3 techniques that we talk about in this particular lesson. The first one is looking at the big picture. So looking at the big picture is saying, okay, so this thing that I'm looking at, like, why is it relevant? Like what is the big picture of the reason why I should be paying attention to this new concept or this idea what is it connected to? And through the big picture, you're able to then begin to understand the details and why each detail fits into the big picture. One of the things that you have to do as a student of science is always be able to take new information and link it to existing information. That allows you to actually make the picture more complete. And at the same time, you have to be able to identify incorrect information and be able to replace it with accurate information. Then the second technique is telling a story. And sometimes with a story is being able to understand the beginning and the end, and then all the different steps that are in between. So classes like biology, where you have a process that you're going through, you're able to say, okay, this is where it starts, and it can even be a visual movie to you. And then each step along the way, ask yourself, why does this step happen? And if this step is disrupted, what would happen? And if I start at the very end, can I go back to the beginning and have it make sense? And then the third technique is actually building a building. And I use this a lot when I was studying courses like physics, where you have a foundation of information. And so you could be saying to yourself, okay, in physics, if I know that E equals mc squared, then on top of that, I can add force equals mass times acceleration. And on top of that, you can begin to layer information on top of one another to get to that solution that you want. And again, if anything in any of those layers are incorrect, you have to be able to identify that and replace that with accurate information, and then continue your process of problem solving. And so at the end of the day, we want to be able to have ways for us to structure our thinking. We want to be able to place information into context in a way that's meaningful to us, and it's personalized based on how we think, so we can win. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start. Really quickly, so for the folks that came in last week, we had a chance to cover potential management. And there was a homework assignment where if you chose to accept, you would be reading these different affirmations each day for 10 to 15 minutes, and then writing down anything that kind of came up around these affirmations. And so, you know, all the homework assignments that I do are really geared towards you empowering yourself, and it's not like homework like you have to do it. It's just more like if you choose the assignment. But I'm just curious, and I talked to one person already who says he's on 30 plus days. Did anybody else have a chance to kind of go in and maybe fandangle with those those statements. Okay, all right. Thank you for being honest. Now, again, I'm going to be honest with you because typically only 10 to 15% of folks, when I do that workshop, do the statements. But the ones that do get through and do those statements, they usually have a really huge, it has a huge effect on them. But I'm always curious about like who actually goes in and does it or not. Not that I'm, judging anybody or anything like that, even though sometimes it's fun to judge, but I try not to because I don't want anybody judging me. But I'm always just curious because those statements may mean something different to you later, and you'd be like, oh, that's what he was trying to say with those. Go ahead.
I had a question. I wonder if whomever was doing it wanted to share, because I'm still interested in doing the statements, but I still haven't.
Did you want to share your perspective? I'm like, come on now, bro. You ain't like you don't know what I'm talking to. I'm talking to you.
It helped clear my mind before doing homework and stuff. It does help it helps keep you grounded in the present instead of you focusing on the future. But it honestly really helps.
Yeah.
Don't take it from me. But I will say that I've done those statements, those 48 challenges, at least 5 times. So the things that I may ask you guys to do aren't things that I haven't spent time doing as well. And I can say that every single time I've done it, different stuff comes up. So you can imagine on the unconscious level, there's layers of stuff that we've been holding on to for a while. And, in my mind, if there are things that are stopping us from expanding at our highest potential, I just want to lean into it, identify it, and let it go. Because I like to win. All the time. Every time. All right. Let's go. So, perfecting the art of asking questions. Let me have someone read, Dewan, can you read that quote at the very top of the lesson?
Yeah. Good thinkers routinely ask questions in order to understand and effectively deal with the world around them. Their questions penetrate images, math, fronts, and propaganda. Their questions make real problems explicit and discipline your thinking through those problems. If you become a student of questions, you can learn to ask powerful questions that lead to a deeper, more fulfilling life.
All right, so what do you think that, Doctors Elder and Paul are trying to say with that statement?
I think it's about basically asking questions can help you get a deeper understanding of things. It can help you, learn more effectively and help you understand more.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything, subtract anything from that? Justin?
By asking questions, you can also get through information that's not true and kind of sift your way through information that is get through information that's you can find more information, important information and kind of sift through the ones that are not as important.
Okay. Go ahead.
The more curious you are about life, the better understanding you'll get about it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I was going to mention is that say that we have this question. I'm just going to represent the question as this point A, right? And we're trying to get to point B. Where there's point B is the solution. And so a good question will have a direct pathway to point B. But there's other questions that people ask that go like this. They're not even really they're not even answering specifically what you want. And people do that on purpose. Sometimes people just, when you ask them a direct question, they don't answer it. These politicians do it all the time, right? But sometimes people will propose a question that's off because they really don't want you to get to the answer. because they don't want you to know it. But you'll see it all the time. Like you'll be in a study groups, you guys will be in groups and you guys are pondering, understanding a concept or pondering a solution to a problem. And, and someone will propose a question, and even as a group, people agree on what this question is, but someone who's really good at asking questions and seeing the intent behind that question be like, no, that's the wrong question. We should be asking this. And asking good questions is a high sign of intelligence. Being able to cut through, what do they say? Cut through the mass and the propagandas in the fronts. Right? A lot of times in society, people don't want to think. They don't really want to think about things. And they believe what people tell them because maybe they have some kind of authority position, but they may not have their best interest in mind. But being able to really, so let me take a step back. I'm very much a proponent of asking questions, and I really like to understand how people talk, how they phrase their statements. Like I pay attention to the words of it because I don't know, it's kind of fun for me. But one time I was, when I first bought my house, I had a 30-year loan, and there's ways that you can pay for your loan bi-weekly, where typically people for their mortgage, they pay for it once a month. So you get 12 payments over the course of a year. But if you pay for it bi-weekly, so twice a month, you end up getting 2 extra payments because it's 52 weeks in a year, not 48, right? So over the course of the lifetime of the loan, you can pay the loan off not in 30 years, but maybe in 22 years or 24 years because you have 2 extra payments that you're paying every year, right? So I was talking to the person on the phone about this program, and I was like, so I don't understand how you guys are making money, right? Because my question was because I don't have a problem with people making money, but I like to understand the perspective of the person that I'm dealing with, right? Like, I'm kind of like, hey, let me understand the game. So I was asking about it, like, oh, well, we charge this fee of like $5 a month, as a transaction fee, or for that $5 a month, 5 times every time you pay. I'm like, yeah, but that don't really seem to me like that's really how y'all making money, right? So I kept asking these questions, and I just realized they didn't know the answer to it. But I didn't let it go, because that's just what I do, right? So, got off the phone with them, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, so when that mortgage, whatever it is, say it's $3,500 a month, right? You have to pay that first month in advance. Then you have to pay twice a month. But you don't get this money back unless you leave the program ahead of time. I'm like, oh, you guys are taking this money and you guys are investing it and making money off of it. I'm like, okay, that's how y'all making money. If you got 1 million people and you don't give you $3,000 or $4,000 up front, and then you charge them every month, you're getting the fee and you're getting that money that's in the piggy bank for them. And I was like, okay, now I understand. Now I can roll with y'all. But I'm just saying, I just asked a direct question like, how y'all making money? And I could tell that he couldn't answer it. You guys get the point that I'm making? Like, no, it's just, you want to be able to do that in life. And you actually will realize that people who are trying to get over in a way that's, nefarious, you could be like, oh, I see you, and I'm not going to roll with you. Or I'm going to decide to roll with you because I understand the game. Right, any questions? All right, let's go. So the hypothesis is it's easier to ask powerful questions if you have the ability to place information into context while you're learning it. Context is developing a relationship with it that provides a framework to apply that information correctly. So we're gonna start to think about when we're taking in information, how do we take it in context put it in some type of framework, so then we can see where the gaps exist, and we can ask questions that can hopefully fill those gaps, if that makes any sense. All right, let me have Jessica, go ahead and read that very first question for us real quick.
You are learning a new science concept in class and you are required to answer a word problem afterwards that doesn't have an answer in the back of your book. What can you do to prove to yourself that you have the correct answer?
All right, let's go. Right, there ain't no answer in the back of the book. Right? I'm not saying you guys, but some people, they do the plug and shove method, right? They got the little formula. They say, okay, I'm in chemistry, PV equals nRT. Let me make sure that I go to the word problem and find the given. I'm going to plug it in there, make sure my stoichiometry is on point and my units cross out. Boom, it has to be this. I'm not saying y'all do this, but some people do that, but don't really think and understand each step along the way. Right? They flip to the back of the book for validation, to hopefully the plug and chug method gave them the answer and oh, okay, I know this. But what if there isn't an answer in the back of the book? Right? How are you going to prove to yourself, which is more real life if you guys go into engineering and research and stuff, right? How do you prove to yourself you got the right answer? Talk to me, y'all. It's time to go deep.
Is it reasonable to have this answer? Just to ask yourself, is it reasonable to have this answer that I have?
Okay.
Is it adequate?
So,
Is it real?
all right, so I'm going to paraphrase for you a little bit. Is the answer reasonable? Does the answer make sense?
Right.
Okay. What else? What do you think of Kamiko?
I think one of the ways I kind of prove it to myself is through like maybe other problems that I've encountered that are similar, like following those processes, maybe combining different processes and like finding the connections between them to solve this new problem.
All right, so if you have other problems that have steps to them, you may look to see, does your problem have similar steps to compare? And do those steps or those segment parts of that make sense? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm going to use understand steps that you can verify some way. What else?
Depending on the size of the problem, if it's a pretty big, it has a lot of steps, do it again and see if you get the same answer sometimes.
Okay.
In calculus.
And look for same answer.
In calculus the other day we were talking about proofs of contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about finding out what it is not to be able to find out what it is.
Okay. So ruling out what it's not.
Yeah.
Okay. Wrong. I'm gonna say rule out wrong approach or steps. I like that. Okay.
Try to look at here, see if they have the same like steps.
Okay. Check. With peers. You guys starting to get the engine moving. What else? What about starting with the answer and working your way back to the beginning and seeing if it can make sense? And I want you guys to start thinking about, because you guys do this a lot in math, how can you check or verify your answers? Like how do you kind of go back and say, I know this is right because I can do other things to make sure that this is the right answer?
Make sure that I squared that correct number. Make sure every single step I did was correct. That's what I do.
I'm just gonna say double check steps. And so for the folks in here that are biology majors or have taken a biology class or remember biology from when you guys were in high school, DNA polymerase, right, the enzyme that replicates DNA in humans, in eukaryotics, it has what they call a proofreading function. You guys remember that a little bit? It has a proofreading function. So what's cool about the machinery inside of our body is that when it's stepping on one of the nucleotides, say it's a G, up here the G pairs with a G pairs with the C, right? Then it steps on a T and it pairs with A, right? So it's going through and it's matching it up, right? But if for some reason a C is there and it doesn't pair with the G, it pairs with the T, it has this proofreading function that basically, I call it the caboose. The caboose is like, hold on, this energy is not right. This pairing is not right. And it goes back, it goes back and it kicks out the wrong base pair and replaces it with the correct one. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have cancer and cancerous cells happening all the time, right? It knows how to, when there is a wrong base pair replicated, how to fix it. But prokaryotics, bacteria, viruses don't have that proofreading function. And that's why they're sloppy, and that's why they make a lot of mistakes, right? But what I want you guys to think about is, how can you develop a proofreading function for yourself? How can you develop ways to verify when you're on the right track and things are in alignment and when they're not? And it takes time and it takes creativity sometimes, right? So I'm gonna bring this up really quickly because I know that some folks are gonna be doing summer internships this coming summer. And so when you're in the lab, like your mind is your machine, right? And you want that machine to be always locked in and not making mistakes. And so sometimes you have, when I read in the lab, I have these 96 well plates, and I have to put a solution in each one of those wells, each one of those 96 wells. So I have my pipette, and I'm going through and I put solution here, solution there. Well, all of a sudden, my mind starts to wander and I'm thinking about, I don't know, some girl that I like, or I'm starting to think about, did I do such and such? And all of a sudden I was like, ooh, did I put the solution in this well? I don't remember. Because my mind just for 1 second went off of what I was doing into something else, right? So do I put the solution in there? If I put it in there already, then I'm doubling the solution, so that's going to mess up that experiment. If I don't put the solution in there, it's going to mess it up because I didn't put the solution that I should have put in there. I'm kind of stuck right now just because my mind just for 1 quick second thought about something else, right? So I had to develop a proofreading function for myself, and I was like, every time I pipette something, I would just put my pinky out, and if my pinky touched the outside of that hole, I always push. No matter what. Next one, draw a solution. If it touched the hole, I'm pushing. But I have to find ways to make sure I don't make mistakes. You feel me? Because my experiment, it may be a 3 or 4 day experiment that's just going to take my time. Maybe I have reagents in that experiment that I can't get anywhere else in the world. And I'm not trying to mess up. Because again, my mind is my instrument, and I have to make sure I keep it sharp and I don't make mistakes. So again, this is something to think about in regards to finding ways to double check and proof yourself when you come up with an answer to something, so at least you can kind of be thinking about, is it right? Right? So on the next page, there's going to be some additional things that you can do that are internal processes. So explore a variety of perspectives and solutions. And that's part of being in a study group or having peers that think differently than you, that maybe came up with the same answer using a different way or a different approach, and analyzing their steps and asking them why they chose to do X, Y, and Z, and does that make sense to you, to further verify, do you believe in the answer that you got? Right? Like, I mean, Andrew, what's up? You know, let me take a look at your stuff. Right? Don't act like you don't do that with the people you study with, especially, you know, but that's what you want to do, right? Look at the big picture and see how the ideas support the big picture. That's still part of it. Does it make sense? Sometimes in word problems, you know, we're taking these exams and we got a whole bunch of anxious energy because we're under stress or pressure from the exam, and you're reading the word problem, but you really don't really understand what they're asking. You don't really have an idea of what the big picture is. So the first thing you do is, what formula should I be using? If I'm using calculus, you know, we're using the power rule right now. I need to bring the power rule in here and figure out how to plug it into this word problem. But you don't really understand what you're doing. So even taking a step back and saying, what is the big picture of this? And how does this formula either make sense to work or not? Or how would I approach this by understanding the big picture and how these small steps are going to add to this solution? And you would be surprised. A lot of folks won't take that extra minute or two and just be like, let me just take a step back and think. Versus, I just got to rush into, and then, you know, they take the wrong path and it ends up hurting their feelings. Again, not none of y'all, but other folks. Find answers to all the key questions. So that's also requires you looking at the big picture to then formulate questions to say, does the solution I have answer all the key questions about what I'm looking at? Does it make sense? You know, is your logical progression? Does it feel right? You know, I actually personally trust in my gut. So, you know, when I'm trying to be creative, I'm trying to figure things out, I go back to my gut and be like, I don't know, does this feel right? And if my gut says it feels right, then most of the time I'm kind of rolling with it. Now, in science, a lot of discoveries come from that intuitive place, that gut. You still have to go back and design experiments to prove it. But some of these initial ideas around, I'm proposing this new model or this new theory, come from that place. And it's always not based on something that someone else discovered before, something that you read. It's just, nah, that feels right. And I can speak for myself because when I was in grad school, I had a chance to develop a model of what these genes that play a role in genetic infertility and stem cells and what they do. And my model dealt with translational regulation of proteins on RNA. And at that time, and this is almost 30 years ago, no one was thinking that way in humans. But actually, I was chilling at my house on my blackboard, on my whiteboard, sipping on a 40-ounce of beer. You know, I was just doodling, and I was like, ooh, and I just started developing this little model in my mind, and I was like, it just felt right. So I was like, okay, I think this is what these things are doing, these proteins are doing. So a week went by, and I was doing these experiments, and some of the things in my experiments were in my model. So I was like, oh, snap, that's what's up, right? So I went to my boss, and I was like, you know, I think that this gene that we're working with, I think the protein is doing this. And she was like, well, why do you think that? I said, well, you know, it just made sense to me and it felt right. And she was like, no one's really thinking that way about what these things are doing, these RNA binding proteins. So I said, well, take a look at some of the things that came out of our screen. And she's like, yeah, it's interesting, but nah. I said, okay, it's all good. You know, I'm not tripping. We went by and she was like, Fred, I've been thinking about your model and it's real interesting. I said, yeah, but it probably ain't right. You know, I had a little ego back then, you know, I had to let it go, right? So then another week went by, she's like, man, Fred, I'm filling your model. You know, can I write a grant to the National Institute of Health based on your model to try to get some funding for the lab? I'm like, bring in some money, what's up? You know, I can hire some people to work for it. I'm trying to get the hell up out of here, right? So she writes a grant, it gets funded for $1.4 million on my model, and I prove it. But my point being is, it came from that intuitive space based on my intuition and my gut. Because my gut was like, nah, this is right. But I still have to prove it. You feel me? So our guts are very, 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 very powerful. But we have to still learn how to discern and harness that. Because if your gut is saying something, but you got fear in your space, it's going to throw off what it's really trying to say because you got fear in your space, right? You got to be neutral. And you got to be like, I got to tune in and get quiet and let everything calm down and then receive the information versus, I really want it to be this, so I'm just going to try to tell myself and convince myself it's that when it really maybe not isn't. Any questions? Any thoughts? No? All right. And we talked about employing a check and balance system. And we also talked about external processes. Somebody did say check in with your peers. I really believe communicating in metaphors and analogies is a very powerful way to make concepts personal to you. So in a perfect world, every single new concept that you learn in science and math, I would be challenging you to make an analogy or metaphor. Because just the active process of taking something and connecting it to something that you've learned before or putting it into your own words allows you to be actively own it versus passively just memorizing something that someone else told you and pretending like it's yours. So the analogy, the metaphor piece, like anytime me and you are studying together and I have a cool analogy of something that I believe I understand, and Johnson's looking at me like, nah, Fred, that don't make no damn sense to me, right? So then I'm like, okay. I'm like, for real? It don't make no sense to you? And she's like, nah, it don't. So then I gotta come up with another analogy that I normally would not do on my own because I feel like I still understand it and I'm moving on. Me coming up with a new analogy and sharing it with you, not only, you know, helps you out if it's a good analogy, but it helps me out because it further expanded me and my ability to own those concepts, right? And trust me, depending on how your mind works, that analogy or metaphor may be the only thing you remember about that concept 15 years from now. But you can pull it back and be like, what's the relationship between this analogy and this metaphor? Oh, yeah, it must be this. And you can work your way back. I don't got a photographic memory. So I'm not pulling pages, some things that I read from 15 to 20 years ago. But I definitely got stickiness in my mind in regards to analogies and metaphors. And if you guys give me some stuff that you guys are studying in chemistry and organic and biology and physics now, I will go back to that stickiness and be like, and then I'll start asking you questions. What did you guys know about such and such and such? And my mind will start to constitute that bug back, right? And be like, got it. Boom, 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 boom. Does that make sense? Talk to me, y'all. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments? All right, we're playing the long-term game. All right, let's go. So, do you have any strategies? Question number 3. To place information into context while you are learning something new. Yes, this is not an easy workshop where I'm throwing you guys softball questions. You guys got hardball, you know, Nolan Ryan pitching 104 miles per hour fastball type questions. Guiding questions. Go ahead, Johnson. Read those guiding questions for me real quick.
When you are learning something new, how do you retrieve information? When you are trying to teach someone something that you have learned, how do you explain the concept? When you are problem solving, how do you apply the information that you have previously learned to solve a problem?
All right. Think about that for like 10 to 15 seconds if you need. Take a minute if that's what you need too. But I need somebody start the conversation for us. Because that's what we're doing right now. Go ahead, Johnson.
When you're like learning something new, to retrieve the information, you can either you can relate something that you understand and try to pull it back that way,
Okay.
or you can also like take notes of it, like in a way that helps you understand it.
Give me a second. Okay, that last part, you said take notes in a way, like, let me break that down a little bit.
So if you're taking notes, some people have like they retrieve the information better if they write it down. Some people have different ways of like taking notes that helps them learn better.
Okay, all right, so people who are auditorial processors, they're taking notes because they're going back reviewing a tape recording.
Yeah.
People who are visual or maybe drawing things or pictures or diagrams of what they're learning as a way of taking notes. Okay, all right. I like that. Based on how you process info. Audio, visual, kinesthetic. Nice. What else? How about some folks in this back table over there? You guys kind of real quiet over there. I know there's some brilliance just waiting to come out. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I would like a note and organize the new material, the new information in the network that's connected with what I learned. Like, you know, to put it in a big picture, you know, I could see the whole picture, to see, you know, where it relate to different parts of my form information.
Okay. Look at big picture and organize. You said notes, I'm gonna say thoughts?
It's like a knowledge network. It's like it's a graph. Like you could see things through like the different connections like that.
In a visual way.
Yes.
Okay. I'll put diagram of thoughts and connections. Go ahead.
So when you're trying to teach someone something you learn, a way to explain the concept would be like putting the information in your own words instead of just copy and pasting it. And you can also like talk about how you tell them how you would memorize it. So like an example of like, so I'm learning about organisms, and so the concept of like cephalopods, right? Cephala is like head, and then poda is like feet, so I think like head on feet, and that would be like an octopus.
Okay.
So just kind of explain how you memorize it.
Okay, I'm gonna put in dissect out meaning. Or in that case, understanding the segments of words, or how those concepts are either independently one thing but tied together, something else different. Anybody over here? Good.
Oh, no, I don't. Well, I don't really do this. I mean, I wish I, because right now I don't have the time. But like, if I was to actually go over, like, so if I take pretty good notes, but I don't really go over them until like I have to do homework and I start looking through them and all that. Like, I remember I had more time. I was only taking one class, and when I took my notes, what I would do is after the class, like I'd go eat, and then I would go spend an hour reviewing the notes and trying to understand them, so that way they stick a little bit.
Okay. All right. So we can put review notes. I mean, the thing is that everybody is different, and you have to understand what is the most efficient way for the way your mind works. You know, when I was a student like you guys, I was open to anything that any of my friends were doing that gave them an advantage or that worked for them. I'm like, I'll try it. I mean, I was just open, right? And I asked them. So, you know, I'm not an auditory processor. I can still learn auditorily, but I'm more visual kinesthetic. But, you know, for maybe a couple weeks, I was tape recording lectures and then going back and rewriting them. And I felt like it was beneficial, but it wasn't as beneficial as me doing problems and then trying to create metaphors and analogy through doing the problems. So then I switched out of it, right? But it's just you figuring out, you know, based on how your mind works, what's the best way for you to not only intake the information, but to process it, right? But I'm just saying that, like, talking about that with folks, especially folks that are operating at a high level, like, I want to know that, you know? So what would you do? How do you do that, right? I care. And you can get blessed. All right, so what's critical as a student of science, no matter what, is the ability to identify inaccurate information and replace it with accurate information. If you can't do that, I'm just gonna keep it real. You're gonna have a hard time getting through, because there's always gonna be new information coming out and being discovered. And whatever framework you have in your mind of how you believe you understand it, if you can't replace that with accurate information or new information, that's what's up. And as new information comes out that's maybe debunking old information, if you can't replace that with more updated information, you're still gonna have a hard time, right? So that's just a skill that you wanna cultivate now and just get really good at it. And part of that is when you guys are doing problems, and for whatever reason, parts of the problems don't make sense to you, is learning how to put a pin in your mind and be like, boom, I'm gonna put a pin there because this doesn't make sense, and I'm gonna make sure I go back and actually address that at some point. Or if you're learning something new, and you're like, oh, I remember this from last semester, it's building on this concept, but whatever you remember from last semester, the new stuff you're learning don't make sense in connection to that, that should bother you, and you should go back and investigate why that connection is not making sense, right? And then you will begin to have, you know, again, that's a way of proofreading your old and your new information with your existing information, and then begin to creating a web or integrating it together in a way that can be more unified or comprehensive in my mind. All right, so let's switch to page 53. We're going to talk about 3 strategies. And looking at the big picture is definitely a strategy that you can utilize in a lot of different areas of trying to master math and science. And some of these work better based on certain math and science disciplines than others, but we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to go through this quick little exercise. So the guiding question for this is, do I understand how the information I'm learning fits into the big picture? How is the information that I'm currently learning relevant to the big picture? If the information I'm learning is removed from the big picture, how does it change or how does it affect the big picture, right? And do I completely understand the big picture, or is the big picture changing based on new information? So I want you guys to take the next 5 to 7 minutes, and I want you guys to write down on a separate piece of paper if you need it, looking at this image. I want you guys to describe this image to someone who is blind, starting from the outside, moving in. How would you describe the complexities of this image to someone who, from birth, they can't see nothing? And break down to them this picture. All right, does anybody have any questions for me? All right, let's go. And for folks who've done this before, get better than you did the last time. You need some paper, Janet?
No, I'm good.
I want you to get better, bro.
Alright, I got a notebook right here.
I want you to get better, because if you're not, then you ain't growing. And you trying to be 10 foot tall when you know Bigfoot, right?
Putting me on blast.
I'm just saying, bro.
All right, 2 more minutes.
let's go, let's go. Finish up that last thought. Finish up that last bit of something. And we're gonna figure out some things around it. So, Han,
What?
you wanna share with us, how you describe this image from the outside moving in?
First image, try swinging your arms around once and you form a circle. Then the second image I guess, the second image is hard to describe. I guess lift up both your arms and just bend them so the fingers can touch. Do that while leaning left and right to form the other side of the pentagon. And then when your legs spread out, that forms the final line at the bottom.
Okay.
And the third image, the square is, you have both your arms up. Then imagine two more arms, one connected with each finger and the other is connected with both elbows at the bottom.
Okay. All right, thank you for sharing. How about somebody at the back table? You want to share your thoughts?
So, we'll start from the outer circle. If there's a circle that contains all other shapes, we will think of it. And from this outer circle to the inside, there's a pentagon. And then inside is a rectangle. And inside the rectangle, there are four smaller circles that they are tangent to each other, and also that rectangle that each has an apron star at its center.
Okay. All right. How about somebody over here? What you guys do? Somebody.
So, I have like two approaches. So
Okay.
the first approach, I would use the blind person's finger and kind of like on the whiteboard trace the circle so they can like visualize it in their head. And then within the circle, I would describe that there's like another shape and kind of trace the pentagon. And then just go from there and kind of like draw it out with their fingers so they can aesthetically like visualize.
Okay.
And the other way would be kind of similar to what she was saying over there, describing the shape, each shape going within, and talking about how like the corners occupy the corner of the shapes occupy that like the outer shape like evenly, and then kind of just work your way in like that.
Okay. Anybody else do anything different? Go ahead.
Oh yeah, so, I mean, in addition to the description, we could use the physical objects because, you know, the blind person cannot see, so probably the best sensation for him or her is to touch it. So when I start describing, I probably prepare some material, like I got a tray or a disc, so it's a round shape. So when I describe the outer circle, I would leave him to touch the tray, so
Okay.
it stands what the circle is.
So, a circular tray.
Yeah, you could like use it this or whatever object that's
Okay.
just like here.
A disc. Okay.
And then when I move on to talk about the pentagon, I would like to have like five sticks and maybe box frames to arrange in such a manner that you could touch and change the shape of the pentagon.
Okay, with sticks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then move on into the interior. I would arrange another maybe four metal stick, maybe different textures, so you could distinguish how those two materials are arranged in different shapes. And so I arranged the sticks, in a rectangle manner.
Okay. So you arrange sticks in a rectangle manner. Go ahead.
And I would like fitting four tennis balls inside that rectangle. And as you can like touch and feel how those four balls are arranged inside the rectangle.
Okay.
And probably for the start, I would have some like paper paper cutting, or to show the different angles, because there are two bigger sharp points and four smaller. That's four bigger and four smaller. And I mean, that's how I could arrange physical objects, to facilitate this process of that function.
Nice. So you may start to realize that like looking at the big picture and talking about the details, everyone thinks about it differently. And how some people describe things, you may even start to realize maybe a easier way or a better way than maybe your initial approach, right? Because when you start talking about there is a rectangle inside of this pentagon, and this is a pentagon. I'm blind, I don't know what a pentagon is, right? Like, those are just words to me. What is a rectangle? Like, those are just words to me, right? I still have to figure out a way to contextualize that, or I'm not going to understand what you're talking about. But there's other ways that you can begin to take this 2D image and turn it into a 3D image that maybe gives the person a sense of what you're talking about, right? So I like the way that some folks were trying to turn this into a 3D image, right? With a tray or a disc, and rubbing your hand around the complete parts of that, knowing that they're equal to one another, right? And, the Pentagon is a harder one to also describe to folks too. And I've seen folks talk about taking a basketball or a soccer ball, because it has pentagons around the soccer ball, putting their finger around that and then overlaying that on top of a disc or a circle, knowing that it's touching at these 5 points, right? But all of these things are starting to give you guys different ways to think about the big picture, and understanding science and these concepts is the same thing. Your relationship to the details is the same. They need to be evolving. They need to become clearer. The relationship has to be able to stand the test of other people saying, nah, right? I like the tennis ball game, right? It's just, so if you're able to, in certain classes and things you're learning, just take a step back and be like, so what's the big picture? Right? Especially in math. Ask the professor, so what is this function? Like, how can we use this function in the real world? Like, let's just take a step back and just give me a sense of like how I can apply this, and then now I can use that as a framework moving forward with hanging meat on it, right? And all the problems I do moving forward, I'm thinking about this framework of how I could use this in the real life, because I got a little something that gives me a bigger picture, right? Any thoughts, any comments, any suggestions? Go ahead.
Any reason why I choose particular that image?
It's just one I came up with. So there's nothing too deep about it outside of the challenge of having someone begin to do it. So it's just, yeah.
You just like the image.
What was that?
You just liked it.
It wasn't even like I just like it. I just like, how can I make an image up that's going to challenge somebody to actually, and that was the one that came up. All right, next part. Second thing that you can do is create a story. This is something that I did a lot in things that have a process, that has steps to it. In particular in like biology, right? Like, again, I don't have a photographic memory. I have a pretty decent memory, but I'm very visual and I'm also kinesthetic. And if I can create a picture or a story around what these proteins are doing, how they're doing it, who's turning this on, who's turning that on, and I can see it as a movie, then I can go back to that movie years later and be like, boom, let me stop here at point 1.2 times such and such, and be like, I can see it, and the concepts will come back to me. But everybody has to figure out again, how do you activate how your mind works? But creating a story is one powerful way of doing that. Because there's clearly a beginning, right? And there's an end, and you can look for gaps in that story. I do this a lot when my friends are telling me something about something that they're gone through, and I'm like, okay, and I start asking them questions about all the gaps that I see, right? I'm like, oh, okay, well, what about this? I'm like, no, you jump from here to here, right? They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, how'd you get from here to here? And I'm like, because in my mind, I'm like, it don't make no sense to me. And then once I lock that in, it's locked in for years. And years later, it's like, oh, I'm like, no, you didn't do that. You told me this. They're like, well, I'm like, yeah, bro. You told me you did. Boom, 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 and boom. I'm like, why you lying? Man, why you bringing old stuff up? Right? But I mean, that's my way of just seeing something and then storing it in my mind as a story, right? So along with this, who or what are the characters in the story? You can think about this in regards to mathematics, especially if you have variables or you have things that are part of that function or that derivative or that integration you're trying to do. Where does the story start and end? What pieces of the story are unclear? Does the new information that I'm learning reinforce the existing story, or does the story change? Again, we're looking for the change. We're not anticipating it, where we're able to adjust if it changed based on that new information. And again, if I start at the very end and I go back to the beginning, does it make sense? And if it doesn't, figure out the reason why. Figure it out. Because what you don't know is that professor, when they get ready to test you on that exam or that final, you don't know what they're going to throw at you. And you want to be able to take existing concepts that you may have not made a tie to and be able to make that leap because you understand the concepts and you have a relationship to it, and it may be a relationship through a story. Does that make sense? All right, any questions? Any comments, any thoughts? All right, and then the last one, creating a building. This is something that I utilized a lot in classes like physics, where I have a foundation of something that I'm trying to build upon. And you can imagine, for folks who are taking physics or have taken physics or are about to, is that, you know, you have a lot of concepts that are tied together, and you can then substitute and, you know, deduct and deduce things from formulas and concepts. So if the foundational knowledge that I know is E equals MC squared, right? If I know that for sure, then I can use that as a building block to put other things on top of it. And I'm linking this together as a building. And maybe this is the actual solution. But if any part of these building blocks are incorrect, I got to be able to identify it, right? And I got to be able to replace it with accurate information and then build it in a different way moving forward. And for me, this worked really good for complicated problems that are like 9 or 10 or 11 steps, right? Because in physics, you know, if one of those concepts is wrong, the whole thing is wrong. And I have to be able to isolate each one of these concepts or steps by itself and make sure that I understand it independently. And then I understand it together as I'm building towards a solution to a problem that I'm trying to figure out. Does that make sense? But again, as I'm learning it, I'm putting a framework in my mind. And you can imagine with this building block too, you should be able to work your way back down to the very initial part of your foundation as well too. So one of the most challenging classes that I took in college was actually physical chemistry. It was the physics of chemistry. And it was one of those classes that used linear algebra and differential equations. And the professor was brilliant, where every single problem you've seen on these exams and the finals you've never seen before, because he created that bug new. And the game, I think I've shared this with you before, but I'm just going to share this with you again, because this is how they're going to test you moving forward, especially upper division. you're going to have concepts that you would have learned, and your homework may have these two concepts paired together. So you're like, oh, the homework assignment, I understand how these concepts are tied together because I've done a whole bunch of problems, and I understand how these concepts are tied together. But the problem you get on an exam is going to have, and this one, it may be one that you learned independently, or it may be tied to 4. But to solve this problem, you're going to have to figure out conceptually how to tie all of these together. And it's going to be new. They will not have given you a problem that does that before the exam. That's how they set the curve. Because they want to know, can you conceptually take that leap? If you really understand these concepts independently, you can take that leap and draw the connection. Does that make sense? So you have to rearrange the way that you start studying this material. The memorization and pattern recognition game is only going to get you too far. Because on that final exam for that course, he gave us 8 problems. He gave us 3 hours to do 8 problems, and he gave you all of your notes and your book. Oh yes, you had your book. And we already know, if you flip it through the book during the final, you've already lost. There's no way you're going to sit here and learn in real time under pressure information you didn't learn before when you had time to learn it, integrate it on a problem you've never seen before, and get it right. The book was just an emotional gift to you, but it wasn't going to help you. And I remember flipping through that exam. I was like, I don't know how to do this problem. I don't do this problem. I was like, I don't do none of these problems, right? I was talking to myself, right? I was like, damn. Because going into the final, I had like a B+ in the class, right? And I'm like, I'm about to get an F in this class. Because I can't do none of these problems. So anyway, in my mind, I just got mad. I was like, you know what? Hell no. I'm going out swinging, right? I'm trying to get myself pumped up, right? Because I'm like, what's up, Fred? You got to get juice because I'm not going out like that. So I was like, I just want to get one problem right. If I get one problem right, then I'll feel good about my F in this class, and I'm going to at least be all right. So I spent like an hour on one problem using that building method, and I was like, I think I got that one right. Then I switched to the second problem, right? 30 minutes. Ooh, I think I got that one right too. And I'm gonna make sure I make a note. I went through the whole test first, right? So the back of my mind is thinking about all those problems in the background no matter what. So when I'm seeing it for the second time, then the choo-choo train started working. It's like, oh, I never thought about this before the first time. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm telling you, I was like 3 universes above me out there spinning stuff. If this spins this way, then this spins that. Like I was out there. I got them all right. All of them. But when I tell you it took everything out of me, it took everything. Everything. And that was the only class at Berkeley that was graded not on a curve. It was only 40 people in that class because it was sufficiently hard enough where if you got those answers right, I'm going to give it to you. And guess what the average grade in that class was? It was a B+. Upper division. Chemistry and chemical engineering majors. They were all thinkers. And I was like, you figured that out? How the hell did you figure that out when I barely figured that out? You know, like it was, but I was like, in my mind, it felt good to be like, these are some people who are going to be creating things in the future. We need smart people figuring complicated stuff out. But I'm just saying, that's the game moving forward. If you want to be the best at what you do, you have to learn how to, in your inner world, put structures in place to hold on to things for years. Not to, I'm taking the exam and forget about it afterwards. But I'm mastering my way in my inner world, inside my mind. I have these structures I'm putting into place where I can create, right? I can build with. But it's going to take time. And it's also going to take you consciously with intentions cultivating that. Because maybe the way that you do it is a combination of all three of these methods. Or maybe it's another 3 or 4 that we've never thought of before. Right? But the key is developing it. Mastering these science concepts and then moving forward with confidence when you really know something. Knowing that you have a proofreading function or some way to further verify or validate when you actually have good thinking and something is right, and when you have bad thinking and something is wrong. And when you have bad thinking and something is wrong, you have to find ways to go back and reprogram that coding and figure out how to replace that with good coding. And, you know, I think it was a workshop that I was in with Jed that he was sharing with me. It was actually during one of the workshops for the internship opportunity where I was asking you about machine learning. And he was explaining machine learning to me. And when I started to understand the machine learning piece, my mind started rearranging like, oh, okay, right. So I was thinking about a new metaphor. And so the metaphor that I came up with is, and I've always for a while, you know, we know that we have a processor in our mind. You know, we know that our mind has the ability to store information, right? So there's a hard drive, there's a processor, and we have our genetics, which I would just say has coding to it, right? There's inside your DNA, there is coding that allows your organism, you as a person, to think a certain way and to process a certain way, right? And so along with this genetic coding, it's really the software. You understanding your software. You understanding what is your approach to solve a problem. Are you more methodical, logical, systematic thinker? Are you more intuitive thinker? Are you somewhere in between, right? Like what your approach is, and then what steps do you take to solve a problem? And every time you get a problem right, it's machine learning, right? Your own body's AI can be like, let me reinforce that by understanding my steps and my process. And when you get a problem wrong, then it's machine learning, right? You have the ability to go back and say, what is the bad coding? What is the building blocks that I thought were actually solid? Why are they wrong in this particular instance? And how do I replace that with good coding? And so your whole life, if you want to think about it, is you developing your own AI, machine learning organism, you. And you're only going to be as good as your ability to go back and self-reflect and evaluate all of these different pieces. And then guess what? When you start doing that, your mind's going to go from a loosey-goosey machine to a real war machine that doesn't make mistakes. Or if they make mistakes, they make them not too often. And when you make them more often, you can identify it and replace it. And over the course of years, you're going to see your mind and your ability as an organism to have higher levels of thinking in ways that you guys would be like, I didn't even know I was even capable of that. You'd be like, damn. And then you're going to have some student that comes to you when you come back and give a talk from MESA at City College, and they're going to be like, damn, Jan, you did all that, da-da-da-da-da. How'd you do that? And you're going to be like, I put the work in, right? But again, all of these things that we're talking about right now, it's inner work, right? It's you working on understanding and mastering what's happening within you. And there's no grade attached to it. But it's attached to the bigger picture of when you actually accomplish your purpose in life potentially, and have a career that you're passionate about and you can be extraordinary at it, right? It has that bigger purpose. And yes, grades are there's little small steps along the way, but they're so inconsequential to the bigger picture outside of you guys going through this internal process of figuring out how not only to turn on, your machine and understand it, but how to make sure it's actually functioning at the optimum and the highest level. Any thoughts, any comments? Talk to me.
Yeah, I think something that's been like hard for me recently and what I've been trying to just be aware of so that I can figure out how to work through it is that like, we all might have like our processes and our methods, but for me, like I noticed that like the same process and method doesn't work for every class, and it doesn't even work every day. And like I think about for me like even like my energy levels, like right now we're at the end of midterm, so I'm spent, like I'm like tapped out, and it's like where I like usually have like a routine that like helps me get through all my homework, I like don't really have the energy, so it's like it's kind of like I feel like it's hard to explain, but there's like something else there where it's like it's beyond like the process, right? It's like understanding like what can I do with the amount of energy I have right now, and like being able to like ride the waves of like that shifting every day, and I feel like that's a lot harder because it's just like it's a lot more abstract, and it's like a lot more internal and intuitive of like I don't know, I guess just like managing your own like emotional and like energetic like resources, and then being able to find out like, okay, what's the most efficient way to do what I need to do, or like how to prioritize things.
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. And it's very insightful, that you have that awareness at that level. Here are my thoughts about it. So we all have all of us have energy cycles, right? And there's an energy cycle called ultradian. So we know about our circadian rhythm, our 24-hour energy cycle, night and day, sleeping. Well, we also have an ultradian rhythm, which is typically 60 to 90 minutes cycle. So every 60 to 90 minutes, regardless of where you believe your ability to conceptualize information and think is on, it's either moving up or it's coming down. Now, the key is to understand when your cycle is going up. But again, our body is an organism, just like you mentioned, right? So the foods we put into our body, the amount of sleep that we have, it's going to be adjusting this. If you put caffeine in your system, it's going to match this ultradian rhythm, where you're not going to be able to identify. But we all know there's certain times of the day, or when you're actually thinking about a problem, that your mind is firing, it's at a high level. And you should take note of that. Be like, oh, damn, I'm doing some really good thinking right now. Versus, I've been reading this book chapter at the library or at Phil's Coffee for the last 2 hours, and like, I don't remember nothing about what I just read, right? Most likely, it was part of the down part of your ultradian rhythm. I was able to tune into mine when I was a student, because every year during Lent, I would do a fast where I do this lemonade diet, where I would just be drinking this lemonade for like a week. And, so when my mind crashed, I could tell. I'm like, I can't even think right now. Like, and when it was firing, I could tell. But it was no caffeine, no nothing. I was just, doing this lemonade diet with the lemonade and the cayenne pepper and the maple syrup, woo, 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 right? So I knew that at 10 a.m., my mind was fired. And I knew right around 1 p.m., it was fire again, right? I could go through and map my day. And so if you understand this, you don't want to take a class at 8 a.m. when it's part of your down period. Especially a class that requires higher levels of conceptual thinking. So there's that part, right? And then the other part of what you were mentioning is, we have our left brain and our right brain. Right brain being more intuitive, left brain being more logical, right? And people have, and they talk to one another, right? People have different parts that are either sometimes not as balanced as others. You may be an engineering person where you rely a lot more on your left brain. Not that you can't use your right, but maybe based on your personality and how you like to think, you just spend more time on this side than on this side. Or you could be someone who's a really creative artist and you like to use more of that intuitive creative side of your right brain. Again, not that you can't use the left brain, it's just you like to spend more time on that side for whatever reason. Or you could be somebody who tends to be balanced on both sides. So for myself, I'm pretty balanced. I know that if I'm taking a math class and things that are more logical, I can go linear. And I can go linear with the best of folks. But I'm not extreme. I know there's people who are just way more linear than me. And they spend their life on that linear side. And I can go intuitive, right? And I like to create in that space, right? But there's certain times of the day where, for whatever reason, I want to spend more time on this side, and it's hard for me to put together logical thoughts. And I can realize that, Jed, through sometimes playing video games on my phone. And there's games that are logical where I'm just like, no, my mind's like, nah, just jump the steps. And other times it's like, no, break those steps down and go through every single one of them. And what that does in the moment, it lets me know where I'm at. And it's just a way for me to check in with myself and be like, I probably shouldn't be doing more mechanistic, detailed thinking right now because my mind, for whatever reason, wants to stay on this intuitive side. So again, all of this is you fine-tuning yourself and understanding your organism, right?
Yeah, I think the interesting part of like what you said, it makes me think about just like like learning the rhythms of your body, but also being able to trust it, like not trying to force yourself to do that logical thing when you're in that intuitive space, you know, and like learning to really listen to yourself, and also like trusting that like that'll pass and you'll like get back to that logical state again, you know. But it's hard. Sometimes it's just hard to trust those rhythms.
It's hard to trust because in this Western society, you know, we place a lot of emphasis on left brain thinking, and that's where solutions come from. And that left brain thinking doesn't always overlap with, in time and space, what's efficient or not. So when you learn to trust that right brain thinking, then you can be like, you know what? My mind's not fine right now. I'm gonna go to the gym, I'm gonna work out, I'm gonna come back, boom, solution's there, right? It's still working on in the background. You just gotta trust that it's doing its work in the background, get your mind off of it, because you can keep pushing and you're not gonna get anywhere, right? And then you come back, you're like, oh, okay, you got that inspiration, because maybe you know you got the hormones and endorphins and stuff working in your body, release some stuff that you had tension around, and you're like, boom, that solution's there, I'm good. So it does take a lot more faith and trust. But what I will say is, in my opinion, when you learn how to trust that, this side, that intuitive side, that gut side, has access to way more information than the logical side, what we actually can prove right now. Like, this is unlimited. And again, in science, you still have to prove it by doing experiments. But having access to this, it's next level. Go ahead.
What do you think about the statement, we should develop your strong side?
Say that one more time?
What do you think about the statement, we should develop our strong sides first and work on it heavy, and then maybe focus on our weak sides? Or we should develop both our weak and strong side at the same time? Because,
So,
development commission makes sense?
Yeah. So when I talked about the coding that we have in our DNA, some of this and how you spend time on either one of these sides may just be the way that your genetics are. And so there's parts of your mind that are highways. And you can travel along this highway doing 100 miles per hour. And there's also parts in your mind genetically that are streets. So you only can go 25 miles per hour. And that's when, say, somebody who thinks differently than you has a different approach to problem solving, and you can learn that approach, but that approach to them is part of their highway. So that's just how they naturally think. It's not that you can't go along that street and still problem solve something. You're just not going to be as good as they are because this is part of their genetics, right? That highway. So you always want to be able to identify what are your strengths and develop those so you can be extraordinary at that way of thinking. So you can do 200 in your Lamborghini or whatever it is and like win. And you manage your weaknesses. But you can't be good at everything. Right? Like that's impossible. It's going to take you a lifetime to be extraordinary at your strengths if you actually spend the time to fully develop them and understand consciously how they work and then enhance them. So I ask you all the time, do you want to be extraordinary at a couple things, or do you want to be good at 10 things? And each person can kind of go about and say, I would rather be good at 10 things. You have a job, but I'm extraordinary. No one thinks like me like this in the world. At 2 things, no one thinks like me. I'm going to win no matter what situation I'm in because I'm a unicorn in this space, right? So again, these are things that we have to think about. But that would be my way of addressing that. Is yes, focus on the areas that are your strengths and be extraordinary at those, but make sure that your weaknesses aren't things that hinder you from getting back to your strengths. Because in the real world, you can hire people that do things in the areas of your weaknesses or areas that you're not as good at. You put them on your team. And you go back to the things that you do well, right? Any other questions? All right. Well, we conclude this workshop.